What if I told you that inside the walls of a courtroom a storm is brewing that could shatter reputations, silence powerful voices, and expose secrets no one ever expected to see daylight tonight? We are diving into the shocking revelations from the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni case, where unsealed documents twist the story in ways Hollywood never saw coming. And trust me, once you hear this, you will not be able to look at this saga the same way again. The air around this case is thick, with tension as every newly unsealed document seems to add another layer of chaos and suspicion. And when we peel back these pages, we find ourselves staring into a story that feels less like a legal dispute and more like the script of a psychological thriller. One moment, we are told that Isabella Ferrer, the young actress who once played the younger version of Blake Lively's character in It Ends With Us, wanted nothing more than to stay out of the mess. Yet suddenly her name appears in filings. Her attorney throws accusations of harassment, and her narrative shifts dramatically from praising Justin Baldoni to portraying herself as a victim of legal pursuit. Now imagine the whiplash audiences feel when they read these unsealed passages. Blake herself insisted that Isabella held critical knowledge not just about alleged inappropriate comments, but about editing cuts, marketing decisions, and even the supposed retaliation campaign, all of which sounds impossible given Isabella's limited role on set. And yet here she is at the center of a swirling storm that raises one haunting question: who is influencing her voice behind closed doors? When we look closer, it becomes clear that Blake may have been the one shaping this young actress's perception, because early on, Isabella praised Justin, publicly described him as a supportive figure, said the set was a safe environment, and even credited him with making her experience positive. But fast forward to the legal chaos, and suddenly, her tone has reversed. She aligns with Blake's accusations, and the whole situation begins to look less like organic testimony and more like carefully constructed narrative management. The filings reveal that Isabella's lawyer accused Justin of a publicity stunt of dragging her unwillingly into the spotlight. Yet those same filings confirm that Blake subpoenaed her first and Isabella complied without complaint. So why the double standard? Why the aggression when it came from Justin's side? These are not coincidences, they are tactics. And if we follow the paper trail, the puzzle pieces suggest a story of manipulation and control, where witnesses are reshaped to fit a desired story arc. And the most chilling part is how transparent it becomes once the curtain is pulled back. Isabella had no involvement in editing, no role in marketing, no access to creative cuts. Yet Blake insisted she did, which makes us wonder, was this an honest misunderstanding, or was it a deliberate attempt to plant someone else's words into Isabella's mouth to use her as a proxy for claims that Blake herself could not prove? The tension builds further when we read the unsealed passages that describe Isabella accusing Justin of appropriating her narrative by sharing text messages in which she praised him and called the set safe. Stop for a second and think about how bizarre that is. How can someone sharing your positive words be labeled appropriation unless those words now contradict the script you have been handed to follow? What we see here is not a simple case of he said, she said. It is a collision of two realities. The one Isabella originally lived, and the one Blake seems to have written for her after the fact. And in this collision lies the suspense that grips the audience. Because if a witness can be swayed, reshaped, and redirected, what does that mean for the credibility of the larger case? And what does it say about how far Blake is willing to go to make her narrative the winning one? From the outside looking in, it feels as though we are watching a grand chess match where every move is calculated, every piece is expendable, and Isabella just happened to be the pawn sacrificed to keep Blake's storyline alive. Yet, in sacrificing that pawn, Blake may have revealed her strategy too clearly, because audiences are not blind. They see the inconsistencies, they notice the reversals, and each revelation chips away at the carefully polished image she once controlled. And as we dig deeper into these filings, the picture gets even darker. The unsealed records describe Isabella as having knowledge of discriminatory and harassing actions on set. But by all available accounts, she and Blake were never on set at the same time, meaning whatever she knows could only have been secondhand whispered to her by someone who wanted her to believe it. And in that detail lies the shock. Because it is one thing to testify to what you personally experienced. It is another to repeat someone else's narrative and present it as your own. The court of public opinion may not decide legal cases, but it certainly decides reputations. And in that court, Isabella risks being remembered not as the rising actress who charmed audiences, but as the young witness whose story was rewritten by forces larger than herself, while Justin stands at the center of it all, watching his once positive relationship with her transformed into ammunition against him. You can sense his frustration. In the filings, you can sense his confusion in the way he is forced to defend against accusations that seem to contradict reality. And this is where the suspense tightens, because if Isabella's story can be flipped so easily, what other testimonies may have been shaped, what other truths bent, and what other voices manipulated to fit a script that may not align with the facts? This is why these unsealed documents matter. They do not simply add words to a case file, they reveal the mechanisms of influence working behind the scenes, the strings being pulled, and the illusions being crafted for the public eye. And as we read line after line, it becomes impossible to ignore that something larger is at play here. Something that transcends a simple dispute and hints at a campaign carefully orchestrated to paint Justin in the darkest colors possible. The tension is palpable, the shock undeniable, and the suspense unending, because we know this is only the beginning of what those documents hold, and the deeper we go, the more explosive it promises to become. As the pages of these unsealed documents unfold, another name emerges from the shadows, and it is the name of Jed Wallace, a figure who has become central to a jurisdictional tug-of-war between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. And what makes this segment of the case so electrifying is the way Blake is trying to argue that Jed was part of some grand conspiracy carried out in New York. Yet when we look at the timeline, when we examine the exchanges and declarations, what we see is a story that feels far more like smoke and mirrors than hard evidence. Blake and her team insist that communications between Wallace and Wayfarer defendants prove his involvement before contracts were even signed. They argue that discovery confirmed extensive communication in late July 2024. But here lies the contradiction, because Jed himself swore in his declaration that he did not begin actual work until August 9th. And even if we split hairs over whether it was August 7 or 9, the larger truth remains that talking about potential services and discussing background information is not the same as actively conspiring to launch a retaliatory campaign. The filings lean heavily on fragments of conversations, pointing to texts between Melissa Nathan and Wallace suggesting she was in Eastern Time, as if that alone places her in New York. But think about how flimsy that is. Eastern Time stretches across multiple states from Florida to Maine. It could have been Rhode Island. It could have been Scranton. It could have been anywhere. The idea that a timestamp is proof of location is laughable, yet it has been presented in court with the weight of a smoking gun. And here is where the suspense deepens, because if evidence this thin can be spun into allegations this heavy, what else can be stretched? What else can be reshaped into a weapon against Justin and his allies? What chills observers is not just the weakness of the proof, but the confidence with which it is wielded. Blake and her team know that most people will not question the fine print. They will hear New York and assume conspiracy confirmed. But those who study the filings closely, those who connect the dots, see instead a pattern of overreach, a pattern of desperation, where even the smallest scraps are dressed up as decisive proof. And in that desperation, we glimpse the cracks forming in Blake's fortress of control. The unsealed documents show that Blake pointed to Wallace as part of her broader claim that Justin, Wayfarer, and others orchestrated a retaliation campaign designed to silence her. But when we examine the text threads between Wallace and Justin's PR advisors, a different picture emerges. We see people scrambling not to destroy, but to defend. We see nervous conversations about paparazzi photos taken in Ohio, a small town where Justin never imagined photographers would appear. We see his anxiety spilling through the words, asking if he should prepare for more unwanted attention, wondering aloud if he was now a target of narratives that painted him as something he was not. His advisors calm him, reassure him, tell him to stay grounded and remain the man he is. They remind him that paparazzi are now more mindful about photographing children. That kindness goes a long way, and that he has little to fear if he remains himself. These are not the words of conspirators plotting revenge. These are the words of professionals trying to keep a man sane under pressure. And yet these words have been twisted, repackaged as if they prove intent to retaliate. And this is what leaves audiences breathless. Because it is not just what is in the filings, it is what is done with the filings. How they are spun in court, how they are reshaped for the press, and how they are used to draw suspicion around Justin, when the core of the story tells a far different tale. Another fascinating revelation from the unsealed passages involves Justin sharing an inspirational post from someone connected to his Man Enough project, a post that spoke to his intentions of honoring victims and raising awareness, not to diminish anyone's story, but to amplify hope and understanding. But here again, Blake's side cast it as part of a smear campaign. They argued that amplifying a third party's positive perspective was manipulative, that it somehow targeted Blake, even when the message made no mention of her. What is stunning is the way this narrative has been crafted to make even positive words look like weapons. Justin's advisors even suggested that third parties share the post instead of him directly to avoid misinterpretation, which shows caution, not aggression, restraint, not retaliation, but when the other side presents it, the caution itself is reframed as evidence of scheming. It becomes clear to anyone watching that perception, not fact, is driving the battle, and perception can be more dangerous than any filing, because once the public believes a story, it becomes almost impossible to rewrite it. This is the razor-thin edge Justin walks on every day, where even his attempt to do good can be recast as proof of bad intent, and the unsealed records lay that edge bare for the world to see. The suspense here is not whether Justin is guilty of retaliation. The suspense is how much further perception will be twisted against him, how far the opposing team will go to rewrite everyday interactions into conspiracies, and how long the court of public opinion will continue to believe it before they begin to question the inconsistencies. But what raises the stakes even higher is how the documents connect back to the actions of Stephanie Jones, the former publicist, whose choices ignited much of this chaos. It was Jones who allegedly accessed private information from Jennifer Abel's phone. It was Jones who shared materials she should not have had. It was Jones whose reckless decisions gave Blake's PR network ammunition they were never supposed to see, and once that fire was lit, it spread fast. Leslie Sloan, Blake's PR strategist, was allegedly so eager to use the stolen information that she called Melissa Nathan and warned her she would be sued, referencing text messages that by timeline had not yet been legally obtained. The arrogance of such a call is staggering. It suggested knowledge of information before any official subpoena could have delivered it. And that arrogance may be the thread that unravels the entire narrative. Because if evidence was accessed prematurely, if threats were made based on ill-gotten materials, then what does that say about the foundation of Blake's case? What does it say about the lengths her team is willing to go? And what does it say about the credibility of witnesses like Isabella Ferrer, whose voices now seem less like independent testimony and more like echoes of someone else's script? The deeper we dig into these documents, the more the sense of unease grows, because it feels less like a case being built on fact, and more like a play being performed for an audience. The props are selective texts, the costumes are carefully chosen words, and the stage lights are trained on Justin every step of the way, while the hands moving the strings remain hidden. In the dark, the suspense for the audience is unbearable because each revelation suggests there is more beneath the surface, more secrets, more manipulations, more cracks in the facade, and the question becomes not if, but when the dam will break. The more we peel back the layers of these filings, the clearer it becomes that what is unfolding is not just a legal case, but a power struggle where every player is fighting for control of the narrative. And one of the most striking elements buried in the unsealed passages is how the public image of Justin Baldoni has been both weaponized and distorted, because we see moments where the media labels him the unbothered king after being photographed in a seemingly casual setting with Emily. But behind the curtain, the texts tell another story. One of deep anxiety, sleepless nights, and a man struggling to comprehend how quickly his life has become a battlefield. And this duality between public perception and private reality is what makes the revelation so chilling, because we realize that Justin is not orchestrating a campaign, he is surviving one. His advisors try to steady him, suggesting he lean into normal life moments to redirect attention, reminding him that the more he appears grounded and relatable, the harder it will be for the negative narratives to stick. But what we also see in these texts is fear, raw, human fear that no PR strategy can fully mask. And when those unsealed lines hit the public record, the contrast between what Justin projected and what he felt becomes impossible to ignore. This is where the suspense deepens, because the audience begins to question how many other so-called narratives in this saga are masks hiding very different truths beneath the surface. And if Justin, the so-called unbothered king, was anything but unbothered, how much of Blake's own outward confidence might also be a carefully rehearsed performance? These are the cracks that keep viewers glued to the unfolding drama, because It no longer feels like a case of right versus wrong. It feels like a collision of carefully constructed illusions. And the stakes are nothing less than the reputations of powerful Hollywood figures. What makes this even more unnerving is how ordinary, defensive PR strategies have been twisted into accusations of retaliation. The unsealed filings show advisors telling Justin to avoid posting certain content directly to prevent misinterpretation, instead encouraging third parties to boost positive stories. And yet somehow this is framed as evidence of a smear campaign against Blake, when in reality it reflects caution and restraint. The irony here is overwhelming, because while Justin's side takes steps to avoid escalation, Blake's side presents those very steps as proof of escalation, and this reversal leaves the audience breathless because it shows just how fragile truth has become in this courtroom battle. The documents also reveal Justin's heartbreak over being accused of things he insists he never did. His messages reflect a man trying to cling to purpose to use his voice to uplift others, but trapped in a nightmare where even his good intentions are recast as malicious. And for anyone reading those texts, it is impossible not to feel the weight pressing down on him, the loneliness, the confusion, the shock of being turned into a villain when he had set out to tell a story meant to inspire and heal. This is the twist that transforms the filings from dry, legal material into a human tragedy. And it is this twist that ensures audiences cannot look away. But what makes the suspense unbearable is knowing that these filings are only fragments, glimpses of a larger story that still remains hidden behind. Redactions, sealed motions, and undisclosed evidence. The imagination races what else lies buried in those documents, what other contradictions, what other voices reshaped to serve the needs of a single narrative. The unsealed records remind us again of Stephanie Jones and her reckless choices, the stolen materials, the premature disclosures, the whispered threats that suggest lines were crossed long before the subpoenas arrived, and this detail is like a fuse lit quietly in the corner of a room. Because if proven, it could blow apart the foundation of Blake's claims. It could show that the evidence guiding her case was tainted from the start, and the suspense grows as we wait for rulings on those very complaints. The silence around them only makes the anticipation louder. The audience can feel it. Something is coming. Something that could shift the balance of power dramatically. Because at the heart of this case is not just a question of what happened on a film set. It is a question of who controls the truth, and the unsealed documents reveal just how contested that truth has become. Every name that surfaces: Isabella Ferrer, Jed Wallace, Melissa, Nathan, Stephanie Jones, Leslie Sloan carries with it a thread in this tangled web. And every thread pulled reveals new contradictions. Justin wanted to make a film to tell a story to honor survivors, and yet he now finds himself fighting for his own survival against a machine that seems intent on painting him as the villain, and the filings reveal just how isolating that position has become. Because when every word you speak can be twisted, when every positive gesture can be reframed as sinister, when every advisor you trust becomes part of a conspiracy in someone else's filing, how do you even begin to defend yourself? The audience feels the weight of that isolation. They feel the suspense of a man walking through a minefield where even the act of breathing may one day be called evidence. And the haunting question lingers: how much longer can he hold on before the pressure cracks him completely? Because beneath the headlines, beneath the filings, beneath the endless speculation, there is a human being caught in a storm that shows no signs of ending. And the unsealed documents are not just papers. They are windows into the psychological toll of a battle that has already pushed everyone involved to their limits. And now, as the storm reaches its peak, the narrative around Blake Lively has shifted into something even darker than a simple legal battle. Because the whispers inside Hollywood are no longer just about whether she will lose in court, but whether she has already lost everything that made her untouchable. The image, the reputation, the carefully crafted identity of the golden star who could do no wrong. And what makes this moment so chilling is that the audience watching from the outside is not just passive anymore. They are active participants, dissecting every leaked email, every cryptic text, every rumor that suggests her once flawless empire was built on cracks, and the media is feeding this frenzy, amplifying speculation about Ryan. Reynolds' silence about Taylor Swift's potential testimony, about Justin Baldoni's growing confidence, and about the strange quietness from studios that once lined up to work with her. And this silence is louder than words. It suggests hesitation. It suggests fear. It suggests that people in positions of power are quietly stepping back, waiting to see if she collapses before they make their final decisions, and the public is watching all of this unfold like a long drawn-out Shakespearean. Tragedy 1. Where betrayal, pride, and downfall are woven together in an endless spiral of dramatic turns. Because how else can you explain the sudden reversal of fortunes that has taken her from Hollywood darling to the epicenter of chaos where every friend becomes a potential enemy? Every ally looks like they could flip, every secret feels like it could detonate. And in the middle of all of this sits the question that nobody dares to ask directly, but everyone is thinking what happens if the texts the judge has ruled relevant are not only damaging but catastrophic. What if they reveal conversations with Taylor Swift that confirm suspicions about backroom deals, manipulations, or whispered betrayals? What if they expose attempts to shape narratives, to destroy reputations, to silence critics? What if those words end up being the smoking gun that nobody thought existed? Because if that happens, then the current scandal will look like a mere prologue to the true story. The one that finally lays bare how fragile Hollywood power really is. And this is why commentators, legal analysts, and even PR experts are saying, with growing certainty, that this is not just about Blake Lively anymore. This is about a reckoning that stretches across the entire industry, because once one star falls under the weight of her own ambition, it forces everyone else to confront their own vulnerabilities, their own skeletons, their own carefully hidden texts and emails. And as the world waits for the next document to drop, for the next revelation to hit the timeline, the energy around this saga has become electric, unpredictable, dangerous. Because no matter what Blake does now, whether she fights harder, whether she tries to settle, whether she tries to silence or spin, it seems like every move only makes the storm grow louder, because the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks, even when powerful hands are trying desperately to hold it back. And so we are left with the image of a star, not simply under fire, but cornered on all sides, trapped in a story that no longer belongs to her. A story now owned by the public, by the press, by the courts, by the very friends who may have once sworn loyalty, but are now whispering to journalists and lawyers behind closed doors. A story that is spinning so far out of control that no one can predict where it ends. But everyone knows the ending will not look like victory. It will look like a reckoning. It will look like a fall. Will look like a cautionary tale carved into the fabric of Hollywood forever. And so here we are at the edge of the cliff. The place where speculation turns into certainty, where whispers turn into headlines, where a once untouchable star finds herself surrounded not by admiration but by suspicion. Blake Lively's carefully built empire is no longer shining. It is crumbling under the weight of exposure, betrayal, and silence that says more than words ever could. Ryan Reynolds remains silent. Taylor Swift remains the looming figure whose texts could burn everything down. Justin Baldoni sits quietly but firmly in a position of growing strength, and the public is no longer on Blake's side. The public is waiting to see her fall because they smell blood in the water, and they know Hollywood always turns on its own. At the first sign of weakness, the judge has already set the stage. The documents are coming. The texts will be seen, and the reckoning will not be avoided. It will arrive like a tidal wave, and when it does, it will not just be Blake's reputation that is dragged under, it will be the entire network of alliances she built to shield herself. Because when one star falls so spectacularly, everyone who stood too close is scorched. And that is the truth. That is the firestorm. That is why this saga matters. It is no longer gossip. It is history in the making. It is the collapse of a Hollywood fairy tale and the beginning of a darker chapter 1, where the masks have slipped and the world is finally watching the real story unfold.